Okay, everybody. Let's settle down. Trying to see where the feedback came from. So welcome to the Tcommerce. It's not really a panel at this point. It's more of an intimate gathering.
We lost 4 players.
Yeah, we'll pretend that they're still there. And I think that we've gotten things off to a pretty good start. Tony, I thought, did a great job. It's great to be back here at TVOT. I'm happy to introduce 2 really, really good fireside chat people. So for the next, hopefully, for this next segment, we'll have a good discussion around the Tcom side. But what I'd like to do, just to get things going, is I've got Mike Fitzsimmons and I have Mark Winger next to me. I'd like each of them to introduce themselves, their companies, the role of your company in the iTV, Tcommerce kind of ecosystem. But I'd like you to spin it by giving us what your view or definition of Tcommerce, which is a fairly tired phrase at this point, what your view of that is. And Mike, let's start with you.
Yeah, thanks. And to kick this off, as I look at the empty seats, I'm not sure if it's a testament to our dominance or to the state of the industry, right? So I think we're gonna be optimistic and think it's the former. But the reality is, we're still in the early stages of this entire effort. I'll answer your first question, or your last question first, in terms of how we define Tcommerce. It's pretty simple for us, and as we've kind of changed the message in the industry, we no longer call it Tcommerce, we call it e-commerce on TV. And that's really how we've kind of simplified the message. In terms of where we fit in, Delivery Agent powers e-commerce on TV for major programmers, brands, and retailers. So programmers such as NBC, CBS, Fox, major consumer brands, and soon to be announced a number of top 100 retailers. We also enable commerce for connected experiences in the home. We'll be in 16 million households by the end of Q3 this year. We have to date announced partnerships to power e-commerce on TV for Verizon Fios, Cablevision, Rovi, and we'll be announcing 1 additional operator here in the next 30 days. So that's kind of how we fit in.
Okay, thanks, Mike. And Mark, obviously, we've listened to Scott and Tracy talk. Can you tell us a little bit about your particular role and maybe your view as well on top of what Scott's talked about in terms of PayPal, and maybe a sense too, not sure, I think most folks here in the Valley know, but that PayPal is part of a larger sort of corporate community, and maybe that could be part of the definition that you approach with.
Sure. We'll post the Scott keynote. I don't really need to talk too much about PayPal, but generally, my role in PayPal is connected devices and interactive television. And PayPal's major theme, as Scott referred to earlier, shifting. We grew big on eBay on the PC, then we shifted off of eBay and grew big again on the PC. And our big theme over the last few years is really to be everywhere the consumer is. And so when you look at a lot about that in the press, a lot of people think that means you have an active presence on mobile and maybe now tablet. For us, that's also the point of sale. It's my group's responsibility is to think about how do you get PayPal everywhere else? How do you get PayPal on vending machines, in your car, on your game console, and then obviously on your television, where the consumer is engaged more hours per day than anything else they do except sleep. So that's really our mission. We sort of cover the long tail, and from a PayPal perspective, we're excited about television as being sort of the next major channel, not only for us, but we think people will come to realize that as well. In terms of our definition of Tcommerce, we do think broadly on it. We think not only about the commerce happening right there through the transaction happening right there through the television. That transaction could be purchasing what you see. It could be making a donation to a worthy cause. But it's also initiating the transaction on the television, and maybe you complete it later, either on the PC, online, offline, whatever, accepting a coupon that you then redeem, for example, at your local Home Depot, or you save for later a transaction that you complete on another device at a later time. So really we see the television as part of this growing ecosystem of commerce that crosses multiple screens, merges sort of the online and offline world together.
Okay. So I should explain too, the format here, we're not going to do any AV. We're not doing any slides on this. I want to get a really good discussion going around some questions, and if we have time towards the end of this segment, I'll open this up to questions from the audience, but I've got plenty that I'd like to ask these two myself. And so let's start broadly first. For Tcommerce to happen, you have to have an iTV infrastructure in place, right? And for Tcommerce to happen successfully from a business perspective, there has to be scale and scope across that infrastructure. So in previous TVOTs, Tracy usually would have a lead-up panel after her opening keynotes that would say, here's the state of ITV across the US. So let's take that role right now. And I would love both of you to tell us, where do you think the state of ITV from a rollout and an infrastructure perspective is? Is it at the point where you feel good about implementing your Tcommerce services or fulfillment capabilities and can be assured of ROI? Who wants to jump on that first?
I think it's a very complicated question. I think the first thing that we think about as we're deploying the e-commerce on TV concept is, where is there actual digital engagement happening with the consumer? And if you look today, where the real engagement is happening, kind of co-viewing engagement, it's happening in online social communities and it's happening in mobile devices, either iPads or internet connected devices. And so there's just not as much engagement happening currently through a remote control. So the broad definition for us in terms of how we kind of think about what it's going to take for the whole thing to move forward is really, when does that engagement hit critical mass, regardless of where that engagement comes from. So that's, we take a very clinical approach to kind of analyzing concurrent usage, basically concurrent digital usage on any device where we can effectively transact with the end consumer. So that's I think the first point. I think that the other point to that we have seen, though, in the remote-based interactive experiences that we have deployed to date, the engagement levels are 15 times higher than what we see on the mobile and social side. So there's a really frustrating dilemma here, where we're only going to be in 16 million households, by Q3 of this year, with a higher kind of engagement percentage with a remote-based experience, but the gross engagement levels are substantially higher when you take into account all the other potential touch points that a consumer can participate in.
So 16 million households based on what platform? Or platforms, I should say.
So, with the announcements we've made to date on the Verizon Fios on Cablevision, and then on the Rovi side, on the connected TV side. So that's the 16 where we have actually remote-based commerce live.
Okay, and that sort of a foreshadowing of another question. That's single screen.
That's single
interaction.
Screen.
Okay. And Mark, how about your view from PayPal's perspective on the ITV infrastructure and the state of it here?
Sure. Obviously we are new to the community, and we've just been getting up to speed over the last year or two. And obviously there are disparities across the community, but we do feel like generally things are getting to a point where things are very doable. And obviously, the two partnerships we mentioned this morning, obviously they have very advanced platforms, and we look forward to working with them and others as well. I think from a PayPal standpoint, when you think about scale, how can you finally scale this opportunity? What we look for is sort of this convergence of trends converging at the same time. And what we're excited about television is a number of trends seem to be converging. First of all, I think the technology platforms are getting to a point where you can have good interactivity. I think the consumer behavior in the living room is changing, where consumers are now more active in their living room than they ever have been before. So there's this expectation of interactivity with their television device, just as there is now with all the other devices they interact with. And then, as Mike mentioned, we're really excited about the power of context and engagement and how that drives commerce. And being a payments company over the last 10, 15 years, we see the use cases that drive consumers to purchase at much higher rates than other use cases. And so if a consumer's playing a game on the PC, they're multiple times higher likelihood to make a purchase than they would if they're just surfing the internet. Or if a consumer is served a mobile advertisement relevant to a store that's just around the corner, the likelihood of them visiting that store is, multiples in terms of, just searching for a store. So we think that, you take into account these sort of emerging trends and then the power of contextual commerce Tcommerce, we think we're finally approaching sort of a point of scale in this industry. And really, you know, I think it's taken a while for things to come together. I would almost argue that the use cases and the efforts to do interactive TV before now are almost more ahead of its time than, you know, just sort of taking a long time to happen.
So Mike, would you agree with that view that there has been a lot of good early work, but a little too early from a scope and scale perspective? And maybe you could walk us through, say, a use case or a deployment or a product that Delivery Agent has had out there, maybe to illustrate some of those points.
Yeah, I think, you know, what we did with the Verizon Fios platform in Q4 of this year was pretty exciting and groundbreaking. And for those of you that aren't familiar with that deployment, the way it actually works is a consumer is watching a television show. At any time that they're watching the show, they press the C button on their remote control, and we basically enable them to purchase products from the episode of the show that they're watching directly from their remote. So that was deployed in 3.9 million households when it actually went out. The amazing thing that we found about that experience was that the engagement was actually 20 times higher than what we see in a traditional two-screen experience. So it absolutely was mind-boggling. The second thing about that was that the engagement duration, that the amount of time people spent activating the commerce application was twice as long as it is in a traditional web visit experience. And the third thing we saw was that it didn't drop off. And what oftentimes happens with these interactive apps is that they're hot in the first week because there's some newness to it and discovery from the consumer's perspective. But this thing has maintained now for the last 7 months in terms of the actual engagement data and the sort of persistence of interest on behalf of the consumer. So those are the kind of things that give us substantial optimism. When you then say to yourself, how do I do this in 115 million pay TV households? Right. That's when you start to get, you know, that's when you start to scratch your head, because simply the capabilities of the other boxes are just not quite there.
So I want to get to that point in a second, but back to the point you were making about the sustain. Why do you think it's sustained? Why that particular application, or do you think that's a general indication just about interacting in Tcommerce on the screen? Is it a hit that we're talking about?
Yeah, no, it's actually pervasive across all the programming on the A&E network. So it wasn't a sort of a function of one program or one hit phenomenon. I'll tell you, like Mark, the macro data is, I mean, if you look at the Google published data on the percentage of product searches that result from seeing something on TV, it's something like 56%. It's a real number, and that crosses all demos. That's you know, they publish this Gen X, Gen Y boomers. It's everybody. So the influence, we fundamentally believe that content and programming and advertising influences purchasing, and so we'll still kind of continue to believe that that's the core driver. At the tip of the spear here is that consumers want to buy stuff they see while they're watching television. I think the next piece around is it's really easy. I mean, it is really easy and it's pervasive. I mean, this is the idea that at any time you're watching, you can press that C button on your remote control and it immediately activates a commerce experience. There's nothing more to it than that. So I think that's kind of the second factor that makes it work.
So, Mark, to that point, Scott alluded to, and Tracy was asking about some of the research, and it seems to be fairly extensive research that PayPal has done in the same area that Mike is talking about. Is there anything that you can add in terms of, obviously it's fueled your entry as a company into this space, but any other markers or any other indicators that made you think, okay, we've got a degree of confidence now, let's go ahead and start, you know, making this entry into television?
Sure. I think I think the research that Scott referred to was some studies we did back in the fall as we were sort of evaluating how aggressive we wanted to be in this space. Obviously, we were working with the community and had great relationships that we've developed over the last 2 years. We also went out and did an independent study as well, research around 4,000 consumers, both PayPal consumers, non-PayPal consumers across, you know, all platforms, across the one screen and the two screen use case, and just wanted to get a feel for, you know, how interested consumers are in the concept of Tcommerce. We, of course, didn't call it Tcommerce, but we showed them pictures and the experience of what it would be like. And, you know, it wasn't, you know, it was fairly, we would say, from our perspective, 49% for such an early stage concept. We considered actually an overwhelming positive response in terms of something that was just a little bit out there, consumers hadn't seen before, they weren't used to yet. The fact that close to 50% said, yes, I'm all in on that. The data was consistent across both a one-screen and two-screen experience. And you know, so that gave us a lot of confidence to sort of to be much more aggressive in the space. Now, I will argue that studies like these, the validity of their results are only going to last for a quarter, right? So as this space evolves, consumers get used to this technology and they see great applications of it, their interests are going to change, and they're going to increase or decrease their interest in the space. We think it's just going to continue to increase over time.
Okay. So let's talk about the platform. Back to the point that you were making, Mike, before I raised a question to Mark, which is, you had said, okay, this is great. We've gotten this kind of response. It's to this particular percentage of the television household, but there's 115 million of the TV household. How can we get into scale? Obviously, the question that a lot of us in this audience have been dealing with for quite a while. Do you see any bridges right now? Do you see any solutions that at least can get us closer to that 115 million? Do you see, for example, EBIF is at last count at north of 40 million in terms of cable households, but that's obviously still cable at this point. Is that enough where we are? Do we really truly need to enable all 115 million households in order to say, okay, that's good, we've got a base for Tcom?
And I think we should say loud and clear, we think we have a base for Tcom, right? We're all in, right? So, and 16 million households for us is a ton, and it's exponentially more than we had 2-3 years ago, and so that's the first theme. I think the things that are complex for us is you think about being an enabler, working with sort of the disruptors in the ecosystem. I think that's part of the challenge, is you see what's happening on the connected television side, and you see the forecasts, and then we all also actually see the engagement data from consumers, and they're still having a hard time figuring out how to make that Samsung television actually connect to the internet and then use the applications that it affords you to use. But we think about those guys, and we think about sort of the Xbox Connects, and there's 65 million Connects out there now. They have the voice and gesture-based commands. They're moving into the living room, which is a profound change. Mm-hmm. And so we think about those trends and try to figure out how those factor in as well, as it relates to the entire ecosystem. I think that's part of what just makes the entire process that much more complex. But our focus today is really on just continuing to expand that footprint with MSOs, satellite telcos that have established footprints, have established consumer relationships. And the only thing that I can tell you that's going to help accelerate that to increase the scale quickly is the mobile side. Right, truthfully, that's where there's no barrier to entry to getting a co-viewing iPad app that enables you to purchase while you're watching tomorrow, right? We're not dependent upon any set-top box. We're not dependent upon anything other than consumer adoption of that actual application. So I think that's the other place where we're placing pretty substantial bets.
So let me make sure I understand the last point that you made. You're placing substantial bets on over the top. And bypassing the MSO essentially or the set-top box from the MVPD?
More enabling the MSO's co-viewing over-the-top engagement, so enabling their own.
So you still have there's still relevance and there's still a relationship that you have to have with the service provider is what you're saying?
Yep.
So maybe let's bring up an example here. You announced last fall a partnership with Shazam, right? And obviously, Shazam has made a lot of noise around, around ACR and getting into to television advertising and enhancing advertising. How is that relationship working out? Can you talk to us about any campaigns or results at this point? Yeah,
well, the initial 2 campaigns we rolled out. The first was with USA Network, which enabled users to use Shazam while they were watching a show called Covert Affairs and buy products related to the show that they're watching from their mobile device. And the second campaign we rolled out was for the Super Bowl. It had 2 components to it. You could actually Shazam any point watching the Super Bowl and buy merchandise from either of the teams, or you could actually Shazam the halftime show, Madonna's halftime show, and buy products related to Madonna that were featured in her halftime show. I'll tell you that we're really excited and impressed by what Shazam's doing in terms of innovating as it relates to interactive campaigns and all that good stuff. I think we're big believers in ACR and how it all plays out. I think the jury's still out in terms of who actually wins from the ACR perspective. I'll tell you that the other deployment we did in Q4 that was kind of equally as interesting was with Fox around a show called Sons of Anarchy, where we deployed an iPad co-viewing app. If you downloaded the application to your iPad, you literally could have it running just sitting in your living room, and it would pick up the audio that was in the show and serve you products directly from that moment in time in the show to your iPad without you having to do anything, right?
Right.
So that was just, that's one of those when you see it in action, you're like, wow.
Well, let me ask you and Mark directly, though, and I don't want, this is not an allusion to whether the partnership with Shazam is good or bad. I'm sure it's a good partnership. I'm looking at the actual consumer experience of ACR, of waiting for that logo, of having to have my app running, of pulling it out, of hoping that there's not enough ambient, that there's not enough ambient or background noise so that there can be recognition happening, and this is on a 30-second spot. Is that consumer friendly? So,
and I'll just chime in because we're actively involved with them as a partner. I think they're doing a lot of things to try and solve that problem for themselves. Mm-hmm. Is it ideal? No. Because when I was trying to Shazam the Super Bowl with the 14 people in my living room, it didn't work. Right? So we know that has those restrictions. That's why I kind of highlighted the iPad app that we did with Fox, because the user didn't have to do a thing except have their iPad open and sitting on their living room table, which I think is a pretty cool evolution for where this stuff is going. So, I think there's still a fair amount of innovation to be done. We're absolutely still in version 1.0 in terms of how ACR is going to influence co-viewing and e-commerce on TV.
Yeah. By the way, Mike, I agree with you. I think that enhanced television and synchronized experiences on second screens to the primary screen is great, and it's the way to go. And Mark, I'm going to pull you into this because you've been too much of a bystander here. From a PayPal perspective, do you feel like that second screen as well as first screen and the importance of experimenting with things like ACR, is that critical to how you see PayPal succeeding in Tcommerce as well?
Yeah, for sure. I mean, I think from our perspective, we're actually comfortable one screen, two screen. Our contention has always been give the consumer as many options as possible. So we're excited to see all of the innovation going on in both realms, and whether or not one will win out, whether or not it'll be a balance over time, et cetera. We're actually not too worried about it, since of course we take a multi-platform approach. So, commerce should be enabled on any device. So if the consumer wants to complete that transaction on their iPad or through their remote, whatnot. So we just want to give them a choice. I think in terms of, what Mike referenced in terms of Shazam, obviously on the eBay side, we have Watch with eBay and a few others. And frankly, I think they're phenomenal experiences. And so I feel like we're 80% there. Obviously we're not quite there, but, I think we're close in terms of the second screen and sort of defining some great experiences and how to do that.
Yeah, and I'll just make a shameless plug here because I think there are examples actually out in the lobby. For example, if you take a look at Softel, I know that there are other companies that are doing that. I know Carrie over at Cable Labs has done a great job with this application. What I'm talking about is utilizing eBIF as a bridge to the second screen. And I think that the difference between eBIF and ACR type technologies, not only is it the fact that obviously it's not a proprietary technology, it's also that you look at Comcast and you see them now utilizing and deploying eBIF as a fundamental part of their system, of their infrastructure, that they will use it as a bridge, less as the original synchronous and windowing and graphic technology that we started it off with, but now more as how can we get and broaden that consumer experience. Do you see that as a valid, therefore do you still see eBIF and that bridge as a valid target for iTV and for Tcommerce still moving forward? Either of you.
Well, I can comment briefly, and again, you guys probably know a little bit more in depth on eBIF than I do. But again, we just see that as just one more potential way to link the consumer over. There's so many ways to link the consumer to the second screen, and so throw that into the mix. And I agree, that for sure could be a great experience. We always get the question, hey, what does PayPal think? One screen, two screen? Yeah. And again, our we don't really care, and we just want to get as many examples out there as possible. And let the advertising community and the programming community and the creative types actually finally be able to design the best consumer experience. Because I can tell you right now, PayPal, we process payments and we do great payment user experiences, but we need to sort of get that infrastructure in place to enable the community to actually come to the final solution on both of these. Yeah.
And Mike, you and your team, especially your technical team with Dave and the folks that came in from the band, have been strong early supporters of cable implementations, of OCAP, True Two-Way, and of eBIF. You see those still as a viable bridge for you and for your business as you're moving forward?
Absolutely, yeah. I mean, the thing that I think is we got to also remember is how does the consumer actually made aware that they can do this? Yeah. So the little overlay is going to become a heck of a lot more important as we move forward here. And the call to action in that little overlay is going to evolve. You know, it's a click see on your remote or log online or download this iPad app, right? I mean, there's a real thing that has to evolve here. I think that, and like Mark, our perspective is we want engagement. We want the most efficient engagement we can get, and we're going to look to optimize that engagement by whatever means necessary. So we absolutely continue to be big believers and continue to invest to support eBIF and think it'll be a vital part of the overall solution.
All right, thanks for indulging me. I just had to do the little eBIF thing. And I know that there are some sessions today and tomorrow around eBIF. And like I said, Carrie, and I think Debbie, you'll be talking about eBIF, I hope, too, in your debate.
Yeah, I can add one more thing to that, and,
sure.
and not just because now that, Arthur, we're partners at PayPal, but obviously, you know, eBIF, I feel like has been, you know, it's associated with the sort of what I call phase 2 of interactive TV, which is maybe the specific RFI use case, which I referenced earlier is maybe a little bit ahead of its time. And you think about giving the consumer coupons or sending the consumer something in the mail. You know, as we've looked at eBIF, you know, obviously it has scale across 40 million homes. And doing a payment, doing a commerce transaction, it's not that complicated. It's actually, you want to keep it as simple and lightweight as possible. So again, we do, you know, obviously eBIF is a powerful technology. I assume will continue to evolve. But as Mike referenced, there are all the great platforms out there as well. So
I want to do a quick pivot here, and then we'll get back. And it's Silicon Valley, so, you know, pivot is good, right? For all of us from out of town, I think we noticed all the people the last couple of days wearing the black jackets and in strange shapes and all heading over to Moscone Center for the WWMDC, right? And I think about a couple of months ago, maybe less than a month ago, Tim Cook was quoted as saying that TV is very important for Apple's future. And then literally almost in the next sentence, he started talking about the iTunes Store. Sounds like Tcom to me. Can you speculate a bit from your perspectives on potential Apple entry into even more so into the TV space, what it means potentially to iTV and to Tcommerce and to your companies and to the folks in the audience in general? This is a fun part. Just go ahead. So I can just throw spaghetti.
You know, actually, yeah, I don't see Apple as sort of a quote-unquote a threat at all. You know, if you think about Apple, they invented the second screen, which I think is one of those major trends that's coming together to help this thing scale. And, you know, I'm excited to see what they come out with. You know, from our perspective, we have been, we've been very focused on working with this community because we're very focused on the content. So, you know, I'm excited to see what sort of new types of devices Apple comes out with. I'm also excited to see what sort of innovation they come out with on the programming side, because that is really where PayPal wants to be tied into, is because it's all of this for us is the power of contextual commerce. And wherever the consumer is watching that video, that's the platform that we want to be on. And right now, that's with this community. So, but we're definitely excited to see, you know, what they have in store in the future. And again, like I said, the smartphone, the tablet, you know, those are powerful additions that I think will help contribute towards this thing finally scaling.
Mike?
Yeah, I don't have a lot to add, but I'll say on a similar thread, and I mentioned it earlier. I think that we should be equally aware, concerned about what Microsoft's ambitions are with the Xbox moving into the living room. Mm-hmm. Now, if anybody's noticed, it's really subtle, but on the UI of the Xbox, TV has now moved to the #1 position, where gaming is the #2 position, right? So I think there's, and they got 65 million of those out there right now, yeah. Right? So I think that, I wish I had more to add on the Apple side. We watch it, we're aware of it. I'm sure they're going to do something brilliant, as they always do, but it's not #1 on the list right now.
I actually think, to the point that you're making too about Microsoft, it's really valid. I mean, you can say that, you know, we've been watching Microsoft for almost the last 20 years trying to take a dominant position in the software stack side of ITV, either OS in the set-top box initially, applications. Everybody remembers, or some people remember, Tiger and Tiger Cubs, all the way up to the purchase of Navic, right? And maybe it was all sort of like, here, watch this hand, while over here we're going to get the Xbox out here, and there's our ITV play. There's our television platform play. It's a closed ecosystem from the system perspective. We've done an Apple on you. Thank you very much. Right? Yes? Yeah?
Yeah, that's why I raise it.
Yeah,
I think
yeah.
that's what just happened.
So are you working with them?
You know, we're in discussions. I mean, there's some pretty exciting stuff there, but it's the same challenge. It's their relationships with the programmers who are our lifeblood are inconsistent.
Okay. Do you want to get any deeper into that?
I don't.
Okay, all right. And if I was Leslie Ellis, I'd be asking you even more questions on that one, but I'm not that good. So why don't we go back to, you just raised the issue about programmers. Let's go back to Tcom. All right, you've got a lot of experience on the delivery agent side of getting programmers actually excited about selling stuff through. All right, do you still see it limited, both of you, in terms of programmers who are going to get more excited about trying to sell or trying to transact through TV? Do you still see that limited maybe to a handful of the programmers out there? How do you get over the hump to where any kind of production team across any one of the networks is thinking transaction at some point? Or is that even a possible future?
I think you have to be able to prove that it drives tune-in and it drives engagement. I think at the end of the day, as long as it's making the content more compelling and more interesting to the viewer, which in turn leads to them potentially to watch more content, that's got to be a key component to make the programmer be motivated to pursue the opportunity.
So what are the programmers you've been working with? I think not everybody is aware of all of your activities. And why did that particular programmer, those sets of programmers, embrace moving through Tcom where others have not? What were the drivers?
Yeah, I think it's the first thing. First and foremost, it's adding more value to their viewers, right? Period. Second is driving incremental revenue, right? I mean, those are the two kind of driving themes, and it has to hit the first box. You have to check that box, or else it's a non-starter, right? And then the second box is it's our contention. It's found money, it's incremental revenue, and it's it's a complementary value add to your viewers. So I think those are, simply put, the two things that tend to motivate. I think the third is, our guys are innovative, and they're all looking to do things, and they're looking to experiment, they're looking to do exciting new things, and be at the forefront of new initiatives, and that's the other driver, the underlying driver, probably.
From our perspective is, for sure, obviously any program you watch across the 800 channels, we think long-term the vision is still you'll be able to buy anything you want in any of those channels. Obviously, going to take some time to get there. So where we're sort of initially focusing is on some easy use cases, just to show consumers that this is doable, and then allow have it enter their psyche, show the psyche, have it show the programmers this is doable. So, for example, the shopping channels, of course, HSN has been doing a great job. But across the shopping channels, infomercials, if you think about you're watching PBS or an advertisement for your favorite cause, you should be able to make a donation right there. Those are sort of the quick hits that we think are very powerful and can really sort of show consumers, show programmers that this is a very doable. And then, of course, then the programmers start to get used to, all right, well, I should start tagging the material in my programs and go from there. So, and obviously Mike's had some success there, but a lot of programmers left, I think, to get updated.
Is there a list of programmers that you would ideally love to work with that you're not currently working with right now, but that you've prioritized and said, I really want to make sure that I get this Tcommerce opportunity in front of these folks specifically? You can feel comfortable naming names or shows or producers? I'd love to understand who you'd want to work with.
Well, from our perspective, and I'll let Mike answer because, again, he's more focused on working with the programmers. I think from the PayPal perspective, we've been a little bit more on the infrastructure side as we just want sort of this to take off. And so we've actually probably been working a little bit more with the platforms so the technology is even in place at this point. But then again, as I mentioned, the previous use cases, programs that are obvious are, for example, the shopping channels. You would think PBS, those programs that have avid avid consumers that you would think then logically would drive to be the early adopters.
Yeah, I think I would echo that as a strategy. I mean, we've got 40 programmers live on our platform currently. Our focus really is on infrastructure and getting more scale. I think the other piece that's worth noting is we're spending a lot of time with advertisers and retailers because we think that's another massive untapped opportunity. And I'll kind of map that back to your question early on about some of the macro trends that are influencing this stuff. I mean, the there's the operators and service providers, which we have to all be patient and get the infrastructure in place. There's the consumer, which we spend less time worrying about because we have enough data, and it's our belief that consumers are going to adopt to this thing. The other really key thing that's happened in the last 10 years is the actual infrastructure for retailers and advertisers to sell direct, right? And the reality is right now, getting a Target to start adding commerce to their spots, they can actually do that now. Right? It's as simple as us taking an XML feed from them and feeding that into our engine and displaying that concurrently with the ad and enabling that transaction. They couldn't do that 10 years ago, right? And it's a massive, massive thing. If you look at the top 100 e-tailers, if it's Ticketmaster or if it's the Targets or the Best Buys or the Walmarts or any of these guys, they're actually finally in a position to sort of electronically transact. And that's one of the things that's going to be a massive catalyst, I believe, as we get more scale on the operator side, is those guys are ready to go. And we are, we have deals that we haven't announced yet with a handful of them that are pretty exciting and transformative, out of the top 10. And they're anxious and ready to roll. It's really going to be a matter of getting enough infrastructure and penetration on the footprint.
So imagine if Tony stayed on stage, and he was joined by Mike LaJoy, right over there, and Kevin Hart of Cox is sitting over there as well, and now Yvette Kanouf of Cablevision. Let's just say 4 out of the top 6 MSOs. Let's elaborate on the last statement that you just made. You can tell them what you want them to do, right? Which will clear up to 75, close to, about 75, almost 80% of the digital cable household. You need scale. What do you want them to do?
A couple comments on that. First of all, we've talked about how do we get to 115 million households or 70 million households, and I think we don't really have to focus on getting a massive number of households. As long as you have a collection of very valuable platforms with high consumer engagement, you're going to see merchants that want to start interacting with consumers on those platforms. And I guess if I were talking to those 4 folks, as we've talked with folks in the space over the last 2 years, there's always a lot of talk. How do we optimize the consumer experience? How do we make that the best and easiest? And for sure, that's the right way to look at it. I've never actually had anyone talk about how do we optimize the merchant experience. And so, and coming from the PayPal perspective, over the last 10 years, as we've grown in scale, we actually, in parallel, have worried about 2 things, and one is the merchant experience, and one is the consumer experience. And sometimes our company leads one way, sometimes the company leads another. But if you think about all of this from a merchant experience, the television platform is just one more platform to engage with their consumers. And if you think about the term platform broadly, you have the internet, then you have the mobile internet, you could think maybe Facebook, you can think eBay, you can think the offline world. These are all touch points for interacting with your consumer. And so, if I were to give any advice, it would be very focused, make it as easy on merchants as possible to drag and drop their existing online commerce backends over to the Tcommerce world. So, for example, when I hear discussions of, well, how are you going to do fulfillment in the Tcommerce world? In my mind, you're going to do fulfillment exactly how you do fulfillment in all of your other worlds as well. And you want to make it as low, you want to make it as non-custom as possible. So for example, if you only hit initially with a couple key MVPDs with advanced platforms, if you only get to 20 million households, but you have the massive engagement rates that we talk about, merchants are going to want to get into that space immediately. And even if it's only 20 million households, given the high amounts of engagement and how easy it is for them to jump onto those platforms, they're going to want to start engaging. So I think merchant adaptability is really a key part of the conversation as well, and that's really where I would be focusing.
So let's pull out some more lessons learned here, because obviously PayPal and the whole Kairetsu that you're a part of, you must have a fairly good list of things that are applicable as you move into television, and the intricacies behind online commerce, behind e-commerce, is something that MVPDs, you're right, are not necessarily that well versed in, or at least in general. I'm sure that there are individuals there who are. Yeah. Besides the issues of making it, of thinking on the merchant side, what are some other lessons you think that, as a new entry into the ITV ecosystem, what lessons would you like to give out to the community, or to, and in particular to the MSOs?
Sure. Well, I mean, it's really the merchant side is the key lesson for sure. And then on the consumer side, I think everybody knows, just keep it as safe and secure as possible. So you can never compromise on safety. In fact, consumers just take that for granted at this point in time. on the security side. And then, on the user experience side, you just want the best user experience, keep it as simple as possible. In fact, the PayPal, we should be a very small portion of the overall experience because the payment, use case should be very easy. So I think keep the merchant experience as easy, keep the consumer onboarding experience as easy as possible. And then, I think the final thing is don't try and build everything yourself. Really try and leverage what's out there elsewhere in the online world and the offline world, and really just consider Tcommerce as just another way of exposing the consumer to a new screen. Just how, for example, m-commerce is just another way of exposing consumers to what already exists in e-commerce.
Okay, and let me push that over to you, Mike, from the perspective of I'm familiar with the product and the platform that the delivery agent has out there, and especially I think some pretty smart usage of consumer behavior and how you're using that and putting it into analytics that you can then turn around back to advertisers, back to programmers. How do you reconcile that, and which I think is absolutely necessary and critical, with the need that Mark has raised up here for the users to know that it's secure and it's safe? Do you see a potential conflict between the need on the commerce and the back-end side for more and more data and more insights into that data versus making sure that people feel aware, secure, and safe about their usage? And how do you reconcile that as in your role on the delivery agent side?
It's a good question. We live in a world, because we power e-commerce and mobile commerce for most of these guys, where we live in a secure world. We live in a world with privacy rules that we don't break, and there's a whole set of standards that we adhere to. So we don't see much different than our current kind of operating procedure, just because it's through the television and through the remote control. A couple of things that we have experienced when we deployed with Cablevision with the click-to-call capability. We had one kid in Long Island call us 21 times. Right, which at $3.95 a call, that was not ideal. So there is a thing in this whole world around how do we protect kids from ordering that we all have to figure out, that we know that. Go back to your question around if we had 4 of the top 6 MSOs there.
Please. Yeah.
And he's not going to like this, and it's never going to happen, but the answer is let us put the damn thing on the cable bill, right? That's the answer for this thing to go from 0 to 60 tomorrow, right? And again, we know it's not going to happen, but that is the answer.
I mean, put the Tcommerce transaction on the cable bill?
Yep.
Why would you say that?
Just to take all the friction out of the process and take advantage of an existing experience, similar to buying a VOD, right, or a pay-per-view, right? That's all. That's exactly in our world, which again we know it's not going to happen. But when we really think about turning this into a multi-billion-dollar industry and having someone step up and lead and try and get an ARPU that actually will move the needle, that's the quickest way from 0 to 60.
Well, what about, I think okay, I'll put on an old Bright House Networks hat. What about the issue of sticker shock?
Those are issues. I'm not telling you that it doesn't have costs associated with it. There's
right.
It's for a rational reason not to do it. But I'm answering your question of what selfishly
No,
I'd be asking for as it relates to the guy that's trying to get people to buy stuff from the remote controls. The other thing, just from a lessons learned that I'll highlight that is the other piece that we have to figure out as an industry is, there's one thing about getting a merchant onboarded. There's another thing about how do you actually connect them with a viewing experience, which inevitably leads to an advertising investment on the platform, which inevitably leads to a complex relationship between the ad sales team at the MSO and the actual. So that's
I think complex is a kind word.
Is a kind word, right? So what the business model that is adhered to, is this a transactional business model for the MSO where they're really trying to drive orders and take a piece of the action, or are they just trying to drive a higher CPM by having a higher value add to the actual advertiser or marketer? There are, again, rational challenges, but we kind of got to get that figured out as an ecosystem for this whole thing to advance. Because the biggest challenge for us is we go out, we have our footprint, we have an excited merchant, and then it's like they're all fired up and we're ready to roll, and then it's just break, stop, because what's the actual business model and who gets paid what, and then try and do that across multiple operators. It tends to get fairly complex. So I think that's the other piece that we could use some help with.
If I can I respond to the cable bill portion?
Yeah, I want you to respond to the cable, but to the point that you just said, I think that it's a critical and it's a frustrating point. I mean, I was feeling that, like the hair on the back of my neck going up. I'm seeing some former Canoe colleagues of mine here, Jonathan Boker, who worked with me and drove our iTV side. I think, gee, did that sound familiar, Jonathan, in terms of the... But yeah, not simple. So
let me make a comment on that. And
talk to the CTOs for a second. Tell them, ask them something. What do you want?
Yeah, I do want to talk. Just to mention the cable bill. And again, this isn't because it's threatening or whatnot. And it sort of happened that the way that the cable bill has developed, it has developed over many years. And the point in time now, as e-commerce takes off, cable bill wasn't developed originally for these use cases. So it just so happens that you're right, the cable bill is not in the optimal position. But even if it was, and I'm not arguing that PayPal is the only solution out there, because we do have a lot of competition out there, and there's a lot of press around PayPal, a lot of wallets coming, et cetera, et cetera. So, and we're comfortable with that. But I think, again, if you think about it from the merchant perspective, even if the cable bill was the way to pay, and you had a merchant that wanted to come, and two perspectives, merchant and the online, offline. If a merchant wanted to come and roll out the same interactive TV experience across 8 different MVPDs, he then has to integrate within 8 different payment methods to receive payment. And that's where I want people to think, sort of the cross MVPD focus. Some things do need to cross. And then I think in terms of the online, offline world, consumers who paid via the cable bill, who started the transaction on the television, wouldn't be able to finish it in sort of the offline world. And so I know these are PayPal themes, but these are themes for all of our competition. And so, I think, I'm not sure I agree that the cable bill would have been a panacea, but I do see your point that it would be the quickest, easiest way right now to get things to take off, for sure.
I think the point of agreement I have with what Mike has said, and also what you've said, Mark, is that on that MSO side, you're right. That transaction has to happen through a click of the set-top box remote control, and/or it has to happen through a swipe, like what we saw this morning, of an authorized or authenticated second screen device that's connected to that MVPD, to that service operators network. Right? It has to be that simple. But I think you also still have to reconcile to the fact that if the consumer experience is going to be that simple to transact, the fulfillment side has to be just as simple and brain dead. And part of the simplicity of that, too, is comfort, right? And ease and security. And if I'm getting something on a separate bill, whether it's coming from this credit card or whether it's on this credit card statement or this PayPal account statement or whatever that fulfillment is, even though I know it's coming out of the same wallet, at least I'm feeling a bit more secure and comfortable that the big bad MSO isn't looking to get as much out of me as possible. Isn't that a model though would that model feel comfortable for you? Is that good enough from a delivery agent perspective?
In violent agreement. I'm just telling you, it would go 0 to 60 if you could press a button and put it on your cable bill, like it or not.
All right.
I think the more interesting discussion, or another element of discussion, is regardless of how things get funded in the future and how things evolve, the television is a household. So now, from an identity perspective, how the television user base and how identity is going to evolve in the household and become probably much more individualized, because that's the way commerce is. Commerce and social activity is at the individual level, and this is the first time sort of in the household that you've had to sort of move that direction.
And just so we can end this. I got the butter knife gunfight thing going on here. But if pay-per-view had required you to check out with PayPal, how big would the pay-per-view business be right now?
Double.
I'll tell you, our partners over at the UFC would not be too pleased, right? Because it would be 5% the size of the business. All right, next.
Right. Well, yeah, okay. I agree with you on the pay-per-view point. It's simple, and that was also historically and contextually correct at that time. The closing point I'd make on that is we're now into what we want is a broader world. We want to add complexity in a simple way by giving people more transactional choices, whether it's something to buy or whether it's paying for something, right? But the ability to transact. And you're right. There are some things I think it's going to be absolutely natural and it's smart to put it on the cable bill because it's going to enhance the value and the brand of that operator. Because whatever it is, whatever that transactional capability is something that that subscriber really wants to be able to enact. And it's good, right? And there will be some things that they'll want to do that they don't want to see from the sticker shock perspective. I think what it behooves us all to do is to figure out how do we make that simple, and how do we give that choice to the merchants, to the advertisers? How do we make it brain dead simple for the programmers staring at NBCU out there, right? And so, and that's still, I think, very much an infrastructure play and an integration play, right? And I see both of those solutions up here on it, right? Would you say that integration is a what percentage of the business that you do today, Mike, with programmers, with the operators, et cetera, how much of it is developing an app versus trying to be the glue that gets all these different pieces working together?
Yeah, the glue is the message, right? Because there's no way to do this yourself. I mean, the glue is the message. It's scalable glue, right? And that's the message. And having guys that are experienced in developing on all these complex platforms is an absolutely key differentiator, right? I mean, whether it's from an advertiser or a programmer or a retailer, there's absolutely no way Target takes this on themselves to go try and figure out how to actually connect their advertising with commerce on, on 6 different operator platforms. It's not going to happen. So I think it's a key part of it.
Mark, I was interrupting you, and you wanted to follow up on something?
You didn't interrupt anything, but I can add to that, and that when we look at how e-commerce scaled, one of the critical parts of that was the concept of, and not to trivialize the integrators and what Mike does in the community today, is sort of the shopping cart, and which is obviously a much more simple concept than what's being done in Tcommerce today. But the fact that there's a community out there, folks like Delivery Agent, that can enable merchants, that can do the work on behalf of the merchants and make it easy on the merchants, will allow this thing to scale very quickly.
All right. So how do you want to work together? Right? To whatever extent that you feel comfortable here. You've got Delivery Agent with all of this experience, integration as well as products and services. You have PayPal with a lot of heft, weight, and a really large number of PayPal account holders. What are ideal ways for you guys to work together?
We brokering a deal here? I think Mike and I are in different spaces, but complementary, which is great, and complementary to our partners in the MVPD world and the programming world. So, obviously we're a payment mechanism. We're a commerce enabler. We can bring a community of consumers and merchants to the table, and then Mike can take that and mold that into phenomenal consumer experiences, which is good for Tcommerce and the overall community, I think.
How does that sound, Mike? All right, one last question. I'm sorry I didn't open this up. I know that we're running just a little bit late. Last question to both of you. To this audience, which is a really mixed, very cool that it's mixed audience of, like I said, there are programmers here, there are developers here, there's technical innovators. What would you want them to take away in terms of Tcommerce about you, your companies? What are, say, a key takeaway point or two, or an action? Or an action? What do you want them to do when they get back to their offices around this?
Our message, we feel like Tcommerce is here. So I think this is the year it's going to happen, and let us know how we can help. That's our main message.
Mike?
I think we need as many people innovating around this space as possible, because there's a lot of work still to be done. So I think the thing that we would just want to echo is, the more the merrier, and let's stay optimistic that this thing has a bright future ahead of it.
Amen. Let's give a hand to our panelists here. Thanks, and I'm not sure if I have any housekeeping that I'm supposed to say, Doug, or do we just? Coffee break. All right, coffee break.